Welcome back to Spill the TXC with me, your host, Amber. As you can see, we're back in TXC headquarters today, aka the C-Max. And it is another scorcher of a day. I've got a hair mask on that is already dripping. I can feel it dripping down the back of my neck. And it's going to be a whole rigmarole again today. Rigmarole again today. Because the phone keeps overheating. So I'm going to need to pause, put the engine on, put the aircon on, cool the phone down, turn the engine off, start recording again. It is going to take a long time to get this episode done today. But it's fine. We work with what we got until we've got the mansion. We work with what we've got. And we've got the C-Max. So I'm actually really excited about today's episode because I've got some viewer submissions. And that really excites me because nobody else has had these stories, which means you've heard them nowhere before. You've read them nowhere before. They're not on any other podcast episodes. They're not on any TikTok videos. They're not on any forums. They are brand spanking new. And I am the first one to tell you. And that's the end goal, I think, is to the end goal is to have the mansion to record the podcast on. But one of my goals is to have 99% just viewer submission stories that nobody has ever heard before, stories that I can be the first person to deliver to you. And also, I want to give my own experiences if they match the episode. So I've got a few paranormal experiences that I will 100% share with you when I do a paranormal. There is actually a few paranormal stories in with these camping stories, but because the topic is predominantly camping, I'm not sharing my experiences in this episode. I'm going to save them for when we do an episode completely on the paranormal. So if you've got any stories on the paranormal, any experiences that you've had or you've heard of, send them in to toxicstories@outlook.com. I would absolutely love to read them. So today's episode is all about scary camping stories. I've got 2 brand new stories, viewer submission stories that nobody's ever heard before. I've also got a couple of Reddit stories in there as well. That being said, I'm already starting to sweat. So let's get started. We're going to start and end with the viewer submission story. So this first one is called, Can You Help Me? People always ask me why I don't camp anymore. I usually laugh it off and tell them I'm getting too old to sleep on the ground or that hotels have ruined me. It's easier than telling them the truth. The truth is, sitting in the woods after dark changes you, and sometimes something out there notices you're alone. This happened 3 years ago. I'd been wild camping for nearly a decade. I loved it. Every spare weekend I could manage, I'd throw my gear into the car and disappear somewhere remote. No signal, no roads, just miles of forest. Camping was my escape, and I wasn't one of those casual campers either. I'd spent years building my setup. Top-of-the-line tent, 4-season sleeping bag, titanium cookware, portable solar panels, expensive camera equipment, a custom-built hiking pack, fishing gear, the lot. All in all, there was probably close to £4,000 worth of equipment sitting in my camp. I knew those woods well enough, or at least, I thought I did. It was late October. The trees had already started shedding their leaves, leaving the forest floor covered in damp reds and browns that muffled every footstep. I parked my car nearly 4 miles from where I'd planned to spend the night. The hike-in was peaceful, cold enough that I could see my breath. Not another soul around. Exactly how I liked it. By 6 in the evening, my camp was finished. Tent pitched, small fire going, dinner cooking. The sun disappeared behind the trees much faster than I'd expected. If you've never been deep in the woods after dark, it's hard to explain. The darkness isn't like it is in a town. It feels thick. Your torch only cuts a narrow tunnel through it. Everything outside that beam might as well not exist. I remember sitting beside the fire thinking how unbelievably quiet everything had become. No birds, no insects, nothing. I actually remember saying out loud, "Guess everyone's gone to bed." It sounds stupid now. Around 10, I climbed into my tent, read a book for a while, eventually switched off my lantern, and the silence came back. Complete silence. Then sometime, I don't know what time, I woke up. Not because of a sound, but because I felt something. Something wrong. You know that feeling when someone is standing in your room watching you? That. Every instinct in my body told me I wasn't alone. So I stayed perfectly still, listening. Nothing, just wind moving through the trees. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then I heard it. A tiny voice, soft, almost whispering. "Can you help me?" I froze. My first thought was exactly what yours probably is. A child, out here. At first I assumed I'd dreamt it, but then, again. "Can you help me?" This time it was unmistakable, right outside my tent, no more than a couple feet away. Every hair on my arm stood up. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. Who on earth would have a little girl wandering around a forest at 2 a.m? I called back. "Hello?" No answer. And then, "Can you help me?" Exactly the same tone. No panic, no crying, just calm, like she had memorized the sentence. I unzipped the tent a couple of inches and turned my head torch on, and I peeked through the gap. Standing between the trees, about 15 feet away, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 8 or 9. Long dark hair, bare feet, a thin white dress hanging almost to her ankles. She wasn't moving. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shivering. She just stood there, looking directly at my tent. And then, "Can you help me?" My heart was pounding. Every logical part of me said she had to be lost. Maybe she'd wandered away from her family. Maybe someone needed help. But another part of me, a much louder part, was screaming not to go outside. I wish I'd listened. Instead, I slowly unzipped the tent, stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. My boots crunched against the leaves. The little girl didn't react. She simply watched me. I spoke quietly. "Hey, are you all right?" Nothing. I took another step. "Where are your parents?" Nothing. And then again. "Can you help me?" I was only about 10 feet away now, close enough to see her face. It looked normal. Pale, but normal. No cuts, no blood, nothing strange, just expressionless. I swallowed. "Are you lost?" She stared at me for several seconds, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Then she answered, "No." Just no. Nothing else. And then she turned, slowly, and began walking back into the trees, not running, not hurrying, just walking as I stood there watching, completely confused. I took one step after her and said, "Wait!" But she didn't answer. She kept walking. And then something happened that I still can't explain. The darkness between the trees. It moved. Not like shadows move when clouds pass overhead. This flowed, like thick black smoke. It slid across the forest floor. It rose behind her. It wrapped around her. And within seconds, she was gone. Swallowed. Like she had walked into a hole in reality. Every sound in the forest vanished again, even the wind. I don't remember deciding to run. My body made that decision for me. I spun around, didn't pack anything, didn't even zip up my tent. I ran, straight down the trail. Branches whipped across my face, roots nearly sent me flying, but I just kept running. And then, right beside my ear, a little girl's voice. "Can you help me?" I stopped dead. There was nobody there. Nothing. I looked everywhere, just trees, and then, behind me, I heard it again. "Can you help me?" I ran again, harder this time. My lungs burnt, my legs screamed. Every few seconds I heard it. Sometimes on my left, sometimes on my right. Sometimes it was so close it felt like someone was whispering directly into my ear. But I never saw her again. Not once. I just heard her over and over and over. I burst out of the woods nearly 40 minutes later. I threw myself into my car, locked every door, started the engine, and as I pulled away, one final whisper came from the back seat. Help me. I slammed the brakes, turned around. Nothing. My car was empty. I drove home without looking back. The police didn't take me seriously. Search teams found no missing child, no reports, no families camping nearby, nothing. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything. Stress, exhaustion, sleep paralysis, anything. Until the next morning. My friend James agreed to drive back with me. He thought I'd had some kind of panic attack, said we'd laugh about it later. When we reached my campsite, the tent was still standing. Sort of. Every side had been slashed open, long jagged cuts. My sleeping bag had been ripped apart, cooking gear smashed, solar panels shattered, backpack cut into ribbons, even my camera completely destroyed. Nothing had been stolen, just ruined. James looked around. Someone really hated you. I didn't answer. There were no footprints. The ground had been soft from rain. Mine and James's footprints were there, but nothing else. And then he noticed something hanging from what remained of my tent. A strip of torn fabric. Soft, white cotton. James went completely pale, and neither of us spoke. We loaded what was salvageable into the car. Everything else just stayed there. I didn't care. £4,000 worth of gear wasn't worth spending another second in those woods. People tell me I should buy new camping equipment, get back out there, face my fears, but they don't understand. It isn't camping that scares me. It's knowing that somewhere, deep in those woods, something knows me. Because every now and then, usually just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I wake to a whisper so soft I almost convince myself I imagined it. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, standing somewhere I can't see, patiently asking the same question. Can you help me? See, in theory, I would love to go camping. Actually, my little girl asked to go camping the other week. But just the thought of there even being a 1% chance of bumping into somebody bad or something bad happening, that's enough to put me off. Just a 1% chance. Actually, I don't think I'd do very good anyway because I don't like bugs. I wouldn't do well with the bugs. I could go camping if I had an RV with all of the mod cons and every reason to not go out into nature. True Appalachian Horror Story by W.S.G. Shorty Bay. This all happened 2 years ago. I was on a road trip to the Appalachian Mountains with my best friend, and it was the first time there, but my friend was pretty familiar with the area. You hear all sorts of stories about how scary it is and the urban legends, and you don't think it will happen to you. Well, I was wrong. Everybody knows the basic rules of the forest, or at least my friend taught me. For example, if you hear your name called, don't respond. Don't scream back to any noises you hear. Anyways, me and my friend were hiking on a trail and decided to set up camp in a remote area. We had a fire and prepared hot dogs and s'mores. We were having a really fun time, but got tired and decided to go to our own tents. I'd been asleep for a couple of hours, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. It sounded like my friend was calling my name. I was just about to reply, but then I remembered the rules. But Loki thought I was going crazy and delusional. I was getting scared because the sound sounded like it was coming from right outside of my tent. And that's when I heard weird rustling against the tent, like right on the fabric, and my friend's voice echoed asking if she could come inside. But I was getting hella weird vibes and stood still and just didn't say anything. I stayed completely still. I tried to close my eyes so it would go away, because I knew that wasn't my friend. But I was shaking and crying from fear, and just stayed completely still. I did eventually somehow fall back to sleep because I was so exhausted, and I asked my friend about it in the morning. She had no idea what I was talking about, and she didn't go to my tent that night. This story still actually confuses the shit out of me and sends shivers down my spine. If anybody knows who this entity is, or who was pretending to be my friend, please tell me and share your experience, because I don't know who or what that was, but this still genuinely haunts me to this day. I've heard about that a lot with the Appalachian Mountains. The rules that, or how I've heard it said before is, if you see something, no you didn't. And if you hear something, no you didn't. And I think what it kind of means is if you reply, if you look, if you give it energy, you invite it in. If you ignore it, if you pretend you can't hear it, if you pretend it's not there, it almost needs that invitation to come in and do whatever it's going to do. Definitely not somewhere I would ever plan on going. But people actually live there. They live in the Appalachian Mountains. I've heard a story before about somebody who lived on or near the Appalachian Mountains, and they would see somebody outside their kitchen window at night time, and they would have to draw the curtains at a certain time every night before it got dark, because if they looked at whatever was out there, that's as good as inviting it in. This story doesn't have a title, but it's by Chaz Riverstone. Many moons ago, I went camping with 4 friends / family on some state game lands here in the northeast US, and had a notably terrifying experience. It was October, so getting kind of chilly, especially at night. We had been to this area before, which featured a sizable creek running through the middle of the forest, as well as several streams and waterfalls. It made for pleasant hiking. However, this time round, we didn't hike very far. Instead, we opted to drive deep into the woods on the dirt roads before finally arriving at a bridge that looked like it might collapse under the weight of our vehicle, where we parked our car just before said bridge. At this point, the sun was already starting to go down, which was the main reason we didn't hike, so we decided to just cross the creek via the bridge, on foot of course, and walk along the trail until we found a decent campsite. We found one pretty quickly, and it was really ideal. We could actually see our car from across the creek, but it was pretty far removed from the trail, kind of hidden in a little nook. We set up our tents, got the fire ripping, and even found a neat little gully in the creek that held our beers and kept them nice and cool, given this was autumn and all. Flash forward, and the first chunk of the evening was one of the best I can remember. A lot of laughing, a lot of music via my brother's hand-crank radio, dancing and just general goofing off. Suddenly, probably around 1 a.m, amidst the slightly drunken haze of merriment, we see a light in the woods approaching. It looked like a vehicle. Thankfully, I was with the group that I was, because we sort of all reactively put out the fire, and fast, grabbed our axes, hatchets, knives, and one Glock 33 my friend had, and we quietly hid, trying to see who the hell was approaching us. As the light got brighter, we saw more lights. This was 2 vehicles, 2 trucks, and it had people that were yelling, hooting and hollering. It sounded like there were a lot of them. They drove down the dirt road until they saw our vehicle and abruptly stopped. They got out and continued to yell. We could barely see them, barely hear them, but we heard the doors shut. And then after a few minutes, they turned on a giant spotlight, like the kind you see people use for hunting at night. They started shining it all around, mostly in the general direction of where our fire had been, seemingly looking for where we were in the woods. They yelled more and more, and then someone took out a bullhorn and started telling us to come out, and we know you're out there, and we're going to find you. We also saw around this point, from the shadows of the light, that there were probably about 12 of them. Most seemingly were riding in the back of these 2 trucks. Of course, it wasn't long before they found our sight, but thankfully not us. Again, we had kind of instinctually hid. It seemed to make them upset when they just saw an empty sight, as the yelling and cursing increased. And the guys with the bullhorn, they became unintelligible. They started breaking glass, bottles I think, before finally one of them took out a gun and fired it into the air. Not long after, multiple guns were firing off. I can't be sure of the size, but some of them sounded really large, and I saw one pretty clearly. It looked a lot like my friend's M4. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm just going by my limited knowledge. They kept cursing and yelling and firing into the air over and over, with the bullhorn dude just going on and on, for what seemed like about an hour straight. They were kind of going in waves after a bit. It looked like they were all drinking and essentially partying themselves, and at one point they started playing really loud, shitty country music, which hilariously seemed to calm them down. Finally, after what felt like forever, they packed up and left while the bullhorn guy yelled, "We'll be back. We're gonna get you." But they never came back, and they never crossed the bridge either, which I found interesting. However, I didn't sleep. Basically, no one did. We tried to have rotations of keeping watch, but literally no one could relax. We didn't drink anymore either. It just kind of ruined the night. And it unfortunately ruined a favourite hiking/camping spot too, because we never wanted to go back there after that. This kind of thing is my worst nightmare. I would take the paranormal over a person or people more specifically with bad intentions any day. And where I've got a really vivid imagination and I have horrendously intrusive thoughts all of the time, that is where my mind goes. I'm in a dark situation and I'm approached by a gang or a group. And actually, I think I might know where this started. So a few years back, I'd been working and I got home around 1 or 2 in the morning. And my partner, he was working in Wales. So I was coming home to an empty house, or actually just my dog, my small little dog. And I came in and I was already scared because it's dark. It's 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't do well in the dark. I'm a bit better now that I've had my child because I kind of have to be in control of my emotions and in control of the situation. But back then, I was a wimp. I still am, really, but even more of a wimp. So I come into my house, I've locked up, I've turned every light on downstairs, and I'm scared. And I'm stroking my dog, and then my dog looks up at the kitchen window and starts growling. And you can imagine, like, my heart's going, I'm getting dizzy. I am so scared. I'm looking at the kitchen window. I can't see anything because I've got all of the lights on in the house and obviously it's pitch black outside, so I can't see anything. And then there's some knocks on the kitchen window. And in my mind, there is a gang outside. There is a group of men outside. And this is my final night. This is where it all ends. Like, say goodbye. Sayonara. This is it. And I'm just standing there and I'm frozen. And then I hear the back door open. And the back door, if I can just explain, you have to kind of go round a corner and it's in the conservatory. So where I'm standing in the kitchen, I can't see the back door, but I've heard it open. And a normal person gets a fight or flight response in this situation. Not me. I get a freeze and fall over response. So I just froze. I couldn't move, and it was like every fiber of my body was screaming at me to just run, and I couldn't. I was so frozen, and I'm standing right next to the cutlery drawer, so I could have just whipped it open, grabbed it. I could have done anything, but I didn't. Instead, what happened is my legs just gave way and I fell over, and I just sat on the floor waiting for my demise. And then my partner walks through, and he'd driven home from Wales and wanted to scare me and thought it was absolutely hilarious. So he's laughing his head off. I then start laughing out of relief, and then I don't know what happened, but then I started manically crying. Really ugly crying like a crazy lady, and just couldn't really explain the switch in emotion there. But yeah, I don't do well in dark situations where you can't see what's happening. And in my head, it's always a group. It's always more of them than there are of me. And yeah, camping's not for me. That wasn't a camping story. My own story wasn't a camping story, but I just know that camping is not for me. This one was posted by a user called Vertigo, and it's got no title, but it's posted under a Reddit thread called Your Scariest Campfire Story. A hiker was making his way through the dense woods of a moonlit forest as he had done many times before. The loosely packed dirt of a trail not yet blazed gave way under his boots as he ventured late into the night. It was far past midnight by this point, and the hiker desperately needed sleep. The man knelt down and shrugged off his backpack, preparing to set up his tent, until he took note of a light somewhere afar in the distance. With curiosity piqued, he donned his backpack once more to discover the source of the light. As he approached the offending bulb, he began to notice that it wasn't a light by itself, but an entire cottage, lit up somewhat dimly in the dead of the night. Manners be damned, the hiker decided that he'd ask the owner of the cottage for some lodging for the night. After all, his tent could be awfully uncomfortable from time to time. However, after several minutes of bare knuckles rapping against solid oak, not a soul answered his call. He continued to knock and knock and knock, hoping that somebody was home to shelter him. After a few more bouts of this, the man pursed his lips, quickly making a decision of ethics, to sleep outside or to intrude without invitation. What they don't know won't hurt them, the man decided, testing the lock to see if breaking and entering was in order. To his surprise, the door gave way instantly, the hinges eerily creaking as he made himself at home in the cottage. The cottage was simple enough. There was a small kitchen that was attached to a living room which held nothing but a pull-out couch. It was fairly standard, nothing fancy, but it was better than a tent. The only thing the hiker wasn't comfortable with was an odd sort of collection that the occupant of this cottage had. Some sort of painting collection of disfigured faces with malicious expressions that lined the walls of the room. Each canvas seemed to glare at the man with personal hatred and malice that he'd never experienced before. After a few moments of curious staring and cold shivers, the man turned away from the art and tucked himself into bed for a night's rest. After a few hours of abysmal sleep, the hiker rose with an uncomfortable feeling. He felt uneasy and stood to his feet to gather his belongings before setting off again as quickly as possible. As he packed his bedroll back into his pack, he stared again at the wall once more to gaze upon the odd paintings that he had seen the night before. His heart stopped cold as he realized there were only windows. This last story is another viewer submission. So remember, you've never heard it before. It's very exciting. This is called I Didn't Believe in Cults. No, it's not. I didn't believe cults still existed until my friend vanished. I've never told this story publicly because I'm scared people would think I'm lying. And I wish I was. This happened 4 years ago when 3 of us decided to go wild camping deep in the forest. It was me, my best mate Josh, and our friend Liam. We had picked a remote spot we'd found online. No facilities, no phone signal, just miles of woodland. It was exactly what we wanted. The hike took nearly 3 hours. We joked the entire way, complaining about our packs and arguing over who had forgotten the coffee. By sunset, we'd set up our tents in a small clearing beside an old stream. Nothing felt strange, not at first. After dinner, we sat around the fire talking until the flames burnt down to glowing embers. And that's when Liam frowned. Can you hear that? We all stopped talking. At first I couldn't hear anything, but then voices. Faint. So faint I wondered if it was just the wind carrying sound. They weren't talking. They were chanting, low and rhythmic, very far away. Josh laughed. Probably another campsite. But there shouldn't have been another campsite. The nearest marked trail was miles away. The chanting continued for maybe 10 minutes before stopping completely. The silence that followed felt wrong. No owls, no insects, no breeze, just silence. We zipped ourselves into our tents around midnight. I remember checking my phone out of habit. No signal. I fell asleep surprisingly quickly, but then something woke me. Crunching. Footsteps. Not one person, but several, moving slowly around the clearing. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. Then came the scratching. Long fingernails dragging gently across the outside of my tent. Not trying to get in, just letting me know that someone was there. I could hear Josh whisper from his tent. He called my name. His voice shook. Are you awake? But before I could answer, someone exhaled beside my tent. Heavy breathing, close enough that the fabric bowed inward with every breath. I stayed completely still. The breathing moved away. Then I heard it outside Liam's tent. His zip moved slightly. Lads, he whispered. Nobody answered. The chanting started again, but this time it was obviously so much closer. Dozens of voices. Still too quiet to make out the words, even though they circled us, always moving, never rushing. The footsteps crunched through leaves in slow, deliberate patterns. And I remember thinking, they're making sure we know they're here. And then everything went silent, completely silent for what felt like forever. And then Liam screamed. not a startled shout, a scream that came from pure terror. He screamed, "Get off me!" His tent collapsed with a loud crash. Branches snapped. People were running. Liam was shouting our names, shouting at us to help him. Josh unzipped his tent a few inches away, and I hissed at him to stop. "I can't see anything," he whispered, and neither could I. Our campfire had died hours earlier. Beyond the tents was nothing but pitch-black forest. We could hear bodies crashing through undergrowth. Someone or several people were dragging Liam away. His voice got further and further away. He kept screaming our names, and then screaming turned into desperate pleading. And then, nothing. Not even footsteps. The forest swallowed every sound. Josh wanted to run after him, but I grabbed his arm so hard it bruised. We don't know how many there are. We stayed frozen inside our tents until daylight. Neither of us slept. Every few minutes we'd hear distant chanting drifting through the trees before fading again. And when the sun finally came up, Liam's tent was gone. Not collapsed, but gone. The only thing left was the flattened patch of grass where it had stood. His backpack, his sleeping bag, his boots, everything had disappeared with him. There wasn't blood everywhere like you'd expect. Just a few dark drops on a broken fern leading into the trees. The police searched for 9 days. Mountain rescue teams, dogs, drones, helicopters. Nothing. The dogs followed Liam's scent for about half a mile before stopping in the middle of a clearing. They circled. They whined. They refused to go any further. It was as though he'd simply vanished. No body, no clothes, no footprints, no suspects. Eventually the case was treated as a missing persons investigation. People assumed he'd wandered off, maybe fallen into a ravine, maybe been attacked by an animal. Josh and I told the police exactly what we'd heard. The chanting, the footsteps, the scratching, the screams. They wrote it all down, but without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. A year later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Against every instinct, I went back. Not to camp, just to see the place one last time. The clearing looked exactly the same except for one thing. Tied high in a pine tree overlooking where Liam's tent had been was a strip of faded blue fabric. The same colour as his jacket, too high for anyone to have placed it without climbing. It fluttered in the wind like a flag as I stood staring at it. The forest behind me filled with the sound of quiet chanting. I didn't turn around. I walked back to my car without looking behind me once. The police never found Liam. No trace of him has ever been discovered. Sometimes I wonder if he's buried somewhere out there. Sometimes I wonder if he isn't. Because every year, on the anniversary of that camping trip, Josh messages me at exactly 3:17 a.m. And the message is always the same. I can hear the chanting again. It won't stop. It already has, Liam, but it feels like it's waiting for me and Josh. In all honesty, in this day and age, with everything that's going on in our world, the more unbelievable a story is, the more I believe it. I mean, human sacrifices, it's a thing, it's always been a thing, and I truly believe that that still goes on, whether that's what it is or not. I mean, it also sounds a little bit paranormal, doesn't it? Because a year down the line, the poster and his friend Josh are still hearing the chanting. If we can take anything away from today, I think it's that if you're going to go camping, you either do it in an RV where you can lock the doors, where you're safe, or you do it in your garden. Let's just be safe here because this is not a safe world that we live in. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as I've enjoyed reading it to you. If you've got any stories, I don't care what the topic is. It could be toxic relationships, revenge, scary, paranormal. It doesn't matter because we are going to be covering everything as long as they're your stories. Send it in to toxicstories@outlook.com and I will see you next week for a brand new episode. I love you. Bye.